Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot 46, Mem Vav, starting from the bottom of Bimhei Amid Beis. For context, with regard to the dispute in the Mishnah about whether failure to sacrifice two sheep as peace offerings prevents the bringing of the two loaves or vice versa, Rabbi Yochanan says everyone concedes, and that brings us to Menachot 46. שאם הוסכחו זה לזה, שמעכבים זה לזה, ואיזוהי, in brackets, zika shalem shchita. If they became bound to each other, and then one of them became lost, that the lost item prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the other. The remaining item is unfit and must be burned. Rabbi Yochanan clarifies, and what is it that establishes their bond? It is the slaughter of the sheep. If the loaves existed at the time of the slaughter, then the loaves and sheep are sanctified as one unit. Consequently, if one of them is lost, the other is unfit and must be burned. Amar Ula, Ba'o b'marava tenufa, Oy seziko, oy ena, oy seziko. With regard to the establishment of the bond between the loaves and the sheep, Ula said that the sages in the West, Eretz Yisrael, raised a dilemma. Does waving of the sheep and loaves before the sheep are slaughtered establish a bond between the sheep and the loaves, such that if one is lost, the other becomes unfit, or does it not establish a bond between them? Bishot le mid Rabbi Yochanan, de Rabbi Yochanan, shchita oiseziko, mikla litenufa eino oiseziko. The Gemara asks, why is there a dilemma about this issue? Resolve it from the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. As Rabbi Yochanan says, the slaughter of the sheep establishes a bond between the sheep and the loaves. One can conclude by inference that waving, which precedes the slaughter, does not establish a bond between them. Rabbi Yochanan guvi come boile mifshat pshitale Rabbi Yochanan shchito iseziko utzenufa eino iseziko. Oy dilma shchita pshitale utenufa misapkale teku. So this teku, see here, this would be we had it recently because we passed the takeoff teku is what I call it. And now we did the tekus. Now we're doing the tekus before we did this take already. It's in 46. Wow. See here? Teku 246? No. Teku maybe 244? This is 46. Wow. 46b? Maybe it's 245. I'll find it 1 second. Teku 240. No. Teku. No. Teku 245, let's see. 69a. Teku 244, 60. Oh. 57. 240, 240, 239? No. 230. I went this far already, might as well go. Might as well complete it, right? Teku 240 is 46a. Yep, that's what it is, 240. the 240th Teku. We did this 11 days ago. And now we're just reaching it in the Daf Yomi. And that is Teku 240. Okay. Well, here we are. And see here, let me check it again. Teku 240. Is it obvious to Rabbi Yochanan? Yeah, that's it. Did Rabbi Yochanan Gufa come by? Yeah. The Gemara answer is with regard to the statement of Rabbi Yochanan himself that Ula Beis Lema. Is it obvious to Rabbi Yochanan that slaughter establishes a bond between them, but waving does not establish a bond between them? Or perhaps is it obvious to him that the slaughter established a bond between them, but he's uncertain as to whether or not waving establishes a bond between them? According to the second possibility, the reason that he mentioned slaughter is that he was certain about it. The Gemara notes that the question shall stand unresolved. Maybe soon in our day. Okay? Okay. Anyway. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina Rav Huna bar Yehoshua ki ksiv kodesh yul Hashem lakohen basar tenuzu ksiv pligi benanas Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina said to Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, but when it is written, they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest, Leviticus 23:20, it is written immediately after the verse mentions waving. And nevertheless, Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Kiva disagree based on this phrase about whether the loaves can be brought without the sheep or the sheep can be sacrificed without the loaves. This indicates that the waving does not establish a bond between these two items. Rav Huna, the son of Yehoshua, replied to Rav Huna bar Chanina, and according to your reasoning, that one can infer the halacha based upon the placement of the phrase, they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. Is this phrase referring to the time after waving, but not after the slaughter of the sheep? After all, the verse speaks of giving them to the priest, which is done after the sheep have been slaughtered. How then did Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Kiva disagree concerning this verse? Elamai Isla lemembra mi karakoi, umay koin shira shem lekoin, davar sofer lekoin, ochenami davar sofer lekoin. Rather, what do you have to say concerning this verse? It must be referring to a time before the slaughter. And what is meant by they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest? It means an item that is ultimately given to the priest. Here too, one can explain that the verse is referring to a time before the waving, and it means an item that is ultimately given to the priest. The issue of whether or not waving establishes a bond between the sheep and loaves therefore remains an open question. Shchita oisazika urminhu ad shelo shachta nifras lachma yavi lechem achar v'shochet. The Gemara asks, but is it so that slaughter establishes a bond between them? And the Gemara raises a contradiction to this from a Braita concerning a thanks offering, which consists of an animal offering accompanied by 40 loaves. The Braita states if one of its accompanying loaves broke before he slaughtered the thanks offering, he should bring another loaf and slaughter the thanks offering. But if one of its accompanying loaves broke once he slaughtered the thanks offering, it is not possible to bring another loaf because the loaves of the thanks offering are sanctified through the slaughter of the animal, which has already taken place. Consequently, the blood should be sprinkled on the altar and the meat should be eaten, but he has not fulfilled his vow to bring a thanks offering, and the loaves are all unfit. Nizrak Adam Toreh Mina Shalem Anapahus. If one of its accompanying loaves broke after the blood was sprinkled on the altar, the loaves are not deemed unfit, and the individual has fulfilled his vow to bring a thanks offering. He separates the 4 loaves for the priest from the whole loaves for the broken loaf. The priest receives whole loaves and not the broken one. The Braita continues, if one of its accompanying loaves left the confines of the walls of Jerusalem before he slaughtered the thanks offering, it is not unfit because the loaves were not yet sanctified by the slaughter. Therefore, he brings it back into the city and slaughters the thanks offering. If one of its accompanying loaves left the confines of the walls of Jerusalem once he slaughtered the thanks offering, the loaves are rendered unfit. Consequently, the blood should be sprinkled on the altar and the meat should be eaten, but he has not fulfilled his vow to bring a thanks offering, and the loaves are all unfit. If one of the loaves left the confines of the walls of Jerusalem after the blood was sprinkled on the altar, the remainder of the offering is fit, and he separates the 4 loaves for the priest from the ones that remained inside the city for the loaf that went outside the walls of the city. The Braita continues, if one of its accompanying loaves became impure before he slaughtered the thanks offering, he brings another loaf and slaughters the thanks offering. But if one of its accompanying loaves become impure once he slaughtered this thanks offering, then the blood should be sprinkled on the altar and the meat should be eaten, and he has fulfilled his vow to bring a thanks offering. This is due to the fact that the front plate affects acceptance of offerings that are impure. Nevertheless, the loaf that became impure is unfit, as the front plate affects acceptance of the offering but does not render impure items pure. Nizrak Adam Toreh Menachot. The Braita continues, if one of its accompanying loaves became impure after the blood was sprinkled on the altar, he separates the 4 loaves that are given to the priest from the loaves that remained pure for the impure loaf. The Gemara comes to its question. If it enters your mind to say that slaughter establishes a bond between the sheep and the 2 loaves of Shavuot, and similarly between the animal offering and the loaves of a thanks offering, then in the cases where a loaf became unfit after the animal was slaughtered but before the blood was sprinkled, since the animal and the loaves bonded with each other through the slaughtering, once the loaf became unfit, the thanks offering should also become unfit. Consequently, the blood of the offering should not be sprinkled on the altar, and the meat should not be eaten, contrary to what is stated in the Braita. Shani toida kriya shlomim ma shlomim chayvim belo lechem af toida chayv belo lechem. The Gemara answers, the thanks offering is different, as the merciful one called it a peace offering, as the verse states, the sacrifice of his peace offerings and for thanksgiving. Leviticus 7:13. Consequently, just as peace offerings is sacrificed without loaves, so too a thanks offering can be sacrificed without loaves. Amar Rav Yirmiyah, im timte lomar tnufa oisa zika aval lechem. Rav Yirmiyah says, if you say that waving establishes a bond between loaves and the sheep, that in a case where the loaves were lost after the waving, now we turn to top of 46b, avdu kavasim avad alechem. The sheep are lost as well, and they cannot be sacrificed, and one must bring different loaves and sheep. Similarly, if the sheep are lost after the waving, the loaves are thereby lost as well, since a bond was established between them by means of the waving. We'll stop here. Continue next Amud.